Hey, everybody, welcome back. I am Emily Moyer, and this is episode number 3 of our occasional series, Navigating the Netflix Realm. Gary Warmerdam is here with me. How you doing, Gary?
I'm doing well. I'm sweaty. Just went for a jog.
That's good, man. I that's generally me, but like I've taken a couple days off of exercising, which is unusual for me because I've been on this fairly extreme cleanse, right? And for the most part, I'm feeling pretty good. But the last couple of days, I've felt like a little bit depleted, and then I can just tell from some of my body symptoms today that like I'm in like extreme ketosis, right? And so like it almost sometimes has that, like some people call it keto flu,
Hmm.
or like for me it's kind of, it feels like I'm high, but I haven't had a cocktail in a month. Right, so it's a little bit like depleted and feels like someone stepped on my head. So I didn't exercise yesterday, and maybe I'll go for a walk today, but then back to the running tomorrow.
Is it some sort of keto diet, or what type of nutrition are you practicing?
No, so I mean, I've done keto diet like for many. I did it. I had a lot of success with keto diet for many years, and then when I hurt my back and had to sort of change the way I exercised, it didn't work as well for me anymore, and I moved to more of like a carnivore-based diet, which worked amazing for a long time. But I got tired of eating nothing but meat, right? And so like I kind of will cycle it where I'll go, like I don't eat strictly carnivore anymore. I do more like an animal-based diet where I eat like mostly animal products, but supplement with other things. And then I'll cycle it. Like I'll take breaks where I'm not really like on anything. But we had a couple of months, like at the end of the summer and into the fall, where we were traveling a lot and attending a lot of events and doing all sorts of things, and everything got like super messy. So I decided I wanted to do like a little bit like stricter sort of cleanup and whatever, take like, a month off of any drinking and any treats or anything like that. So I've been doing actually an eating plan that is one that a friend of mine who's a skin health expert, who I'll actually have on the show this week as well, that he sort of has worked with for a number of years. I don't have a skin health issue per se, but the digestive system and the skin health are like, it's basically the same diet that would be good for that. So I've basically been eating a very reduced list of things that are like mostly animal based, but with a few fruits and vegetables here and there. And like I'm bored of all the things that I'm allowed to eat. And so like, I probably am not eating enough at this point, but like I've had enough squash, I've had enough beef, I've had enough, goat butter and whatever. And I have 12 days left. We had
Or
37
you
days, right? For
37 days.
37. Well, because we got back from our last trip and then we thought, okay, well, we'll just do this until Thanksgiving, right? Until
Mm.
Thanksgiving. And so that was 37 days. And so next Thursday will be the breaking of the fast. So
Okay.
yeah.
Are
So
you doing carbs? Or are you doing like bread or anything like
no,
that?
so
Or
I'm basically eating um, beef, squash, goat butter, lettuce, berries, eggs, and well, I added eggs, apples, and pears and salmon like last week. Before that, it was just the other things. I'm partly doing this as well because I have, so like when I have clients that have issues that I want to prescribe a particular diet for them, like I feel like if it's one I haven't really done before, I need to kind of experiment with it as well to see how it
yeah.
goes, even though I might not have that issue. So I had something come up with one of my clients that I'm like, all right, I'm going to see how that goes for me because I'm having him sort of eat that way and whatever. So yeah, so it's been a pretty, I mean, fortunately, like beef and goat butter and things like that are pretty satiating. But the discovery for me has been squash. I didn't know I liked squash, but there's like several different kinds of squash, and some of them almost
Oh
taste
yeah.
pumpkin pie filling. Like it's like if we have some like ghee that has vanilla bean in it, right? So you put that on that squash and it kind of tastes like Thanksgiving dessert or something, but without any sugar. So it's been good, but I can't wait until next Thursday.
Yeah,
So
you're just gonna go crazy, right? You're just gonna eat everything in sight on Thanksgiving.
no,
Mhm.
I think what my plan right now, and this is, everything's always up for change, is to sort of relax that whole Thanksgiving weekend and, not go crazy, but what kind of what I want to have. And then like go back on some modified form of what I've been on. Cause mostly like, I really like how I've been feeling and doing until Christmas, and then see where I want to go from there. So yeah, so that's kind of the plan for right now. But I haven't had any kind of like anything starchy or bready. I mean, squash is a little bit starchy, but that's like the only slightly starchy thing really allowed. Yeah, I'm excited for like a noodle or a piece of pizza crust, and definitely excited for some whiskey, you know.
I don't know if you're aware of it or if you've had it before, but you can get spaghetti squash, and then
I love it.
you just
We
take
eat
a
that
fork,
too.
and it's like having noodles without having noodles. That's sort of one of the ways that got us by when we were doing like vegetable only type fast type
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah, but if you put enough ghee on it, it tastes almost like noodles. It's pretty good, right? Like enough
Yeah,
butter, ghee, or whatever. Yeah, no, we do spaghetti squash. We do like the delicata squash. We have these ones called blue ballet. The blue ballet one is like, that's like dessert, dude. One day I put it in the blender with the ghee, so it was almost like pudding. It was really good, you know?
what is ghee, by the way? Is that some sort of like
So
seasoning?
ghee is clarified butter. So it's basically like butter with all the milk solids removed.
Okay,
So it's like when you go to a nice seafood restaurant and you get lobster and they give you like that butter to dip it in that's like clarified. That's kind of what ghee is.
that's really like clear.
Yeah,
Like,
it's from grass-fed cows generally. So it's like really clean, good, healthy, easy to digest fat.
how do you spell it?
Ghee.
Okay.
And there's like, we got this one that has some vanilla bean in it. So if you're having it like on the squash, or it would probably be good on like sweet potato or something like that as well. It makes it, you know, more dessert like, which at this point is, you know, is a huge benefit, right? So
Yeah.
anywho, but yeah, so I'm anxiously awaiting something different than what I've been eating next week. But that's awesome. You've been running. Is the weather nice there in Colorado right now?
Yeah, we're still waiting for winter to finally hit, but we've had like one very light snow, and
Mhm.
that's it. And last year, I think by the end of October, by like around uh Halloween, we've already had like a couple pretty decent sized snows, and
Yeah.
we're mid-November. So I'm not sure what's going on with the weather, but it is really nice weather, like it's perfect running weather during the day.
Yeah, it's in the 80s here today. It's been like, you know, we were warm until just a few weeks ago. We were in the 80s and 90s every day till a few weeks ago. And then it started to drop down into the 70s, a few days in the 60s and 50s. But this week has been nice, mostly in the high 70s and low 80s, and it will be the same next week. And then it looks like it's dropping again. But yeah, a little bit longer summer this year. So that's for me, that's always nice. I'm like a spring and summer person. I don't really know.
Yeah. When I was when I was a kid, we never wanted summer to end. And then when the days started getting shorter, we didn't like that either. We liked like long days. Summer lasts forever.
Yep.
Just play outside, till dark every single day.
Yep.
Out.
All right. So what's going on, man? We're here to navigate the Netflix realm. And what you bring into we're going to talk about Manifest in the second half in the patron segment. And I have a few other comments I want to say about some other things I've been watching on Netflix as well. But in the first part, we do something on the Netflix corporation itself. And so what you got today, Gary?
I forgot to do that part actually.
All right. Well, I have something interesting, so maybe you can just play along.
I'll comment on your findings. How about that?
Right. So I don't really know what to make of this but it goes along generally with everything else that I experienced in my life. So shortly after our last episode, my better half was upstairs printing something out there's a printer upstairs that you can use in the like sort of technology center. There's like the whole area upstairs. It has offices you can use and like stuff like that. Right. And she was using the printer and somebody had left something right up there next to the printer. And it was something from the Harvard Business School. And it was a document about Netflix that I'm assuming somebody forgot there, but it does say on the paper that it's for the exclusive use of said person. Right. And it comes from an office at the University of Texas. Right. So while this isn't a classified document, it is sort of authorized for I guess in system use only. So it's not something that if you just probably went to look for on the internet, you'd be able to find. So I thought that's interesting. Of all the things there could be a document about sitting upstairs waiting for us next to the printer, it was Netflix, right? And the document is from April 27th, 2009, but it was printed. This person is licensed to use it between August 21st and August 2021 and February 2022. So for some reason, somebody was interested in this document now, right? Huh. So this document, basically, it goes through, it gives a background on the company. It gives a history of the company and sort of like how it started and then how it developed and changed over the years and what it did to like the movie rental market and how other people responded to that, and then how it's transitioned, and it kind of leaves it off in about 2009. It's somewhere between 2007 and 2009 is kind of where at least this portion of the document ends. And it's pretty interesting. Like it's Reed Hastings started it, right? So he's not like, he's been with it since the beginning. So I guess this this document, the beginning of it, is like starting at the moment where the document ends, which is basically in 2007, he's getting ready to make an announcement, okay, in the boardroom and kind of say where the company is going next. But what was interesting about this is, like, do you remember how Netflix used to be? Like, how long have you been like using or aware of Netflix for?
I don't know. Like, I feel like Netflix has always been around. I don't have in my mind like a Netflix inception date for some reason.
How old are you?
36.
36. Okay. So I'm 10 years older than you. So that might explain some of this. So I like when Netflix first came around, it was a thing, like you accessed it, you like went to the website on the internet, but basically they would send you DVDs in the mail. Do you remember this?
Yeah, I do remember the DVD in the mail thing. I was around when Blockbuster was sort of dying.
Right.
I do remember that, and I assume that would be the period in which Netflix starts to sort of come in, to transition, to take over, sort of.
Right. So there's a lot of conversation about Blockbuster in this document, right? And like what their business model was and why it was successful and what was going on. And Netflix came in and actually, started in the beginning, they weren't necessarily in competition with each other because they were sort of going after different markets, right? Like in the beginning, like when Netflix first started, Blockbuster was very much predicated on having, a location within 10 minutes of where most people lived. And you would go in there and like mostly what they were pushing and what most people were going there for was the new releases, right? The new releases. And you would pay a couple of bucks to rent the movie, and you'd have a certain number of days, and then you'd start to accrue late fees, right? And so they made money both on the rentals, but really a lot of money on the late fees of the videos kind of thing, right? And they were focused mostly on new releases, right? You could find some interesting stuff at Blockbuster, but if you wanted to find like more independent or less known films, you generally had to go to like a mom and pop video rental shop, right? That was, just like a one-off kind of place. So Netflix kind of came in, and while they did do in the beginning, what Netflix was just pretty similar to the Blockbuster, in that like you paid a fee per movie, you paid per movie, and then you paid late fees if you didn't get it back in time, kind of thing.
Right.
And they couldn't compete with Blockbuster necessarily because they couldn't keep enough new releases stocked. And then also there was a kind of a lengthy turnaround between like, when a person like, if you lived close to a big city where they had and at first there was only a distribution center in Sunnyvale, right? So if you lived in Northern California, you could pretty much get it the next day from when you placed your order online. But if you lived anywhere else, it was increasingly long amount of time before you would get your movie. And then there was days that no one else could rent the movie because it was in transit. So they weren't as focused on new releases, which people wanted to rent in high volume. They became more focused on like recommending maybe slightly older or less popular movies from their catalog and focusing on that. And the way that they sort of appealed to customers through that was that they came up with this sort of way of like doing a survey. Like in the beginning, it was just people would pick what they wanted. They started to promote lesser known movies by writing reviews or whatnot about them. But then later they realized that taking surveys when customers came in, when they first onboarded, about what kind of movies they liked, and then having them rate the movies they had already seen, helped them create a recommendation list. And the recommendation list would generally be full of movies that weren't popular, but seems to fit the things that the other person liked, right? So it was creating like more like people were making more use of the library instead of everybody renting the same 10 movies like was going on at Blockbuster, right?
Right.
And so that was kind of how they originally grew. And then eventually people didn't really like having to wait so long for their movie and still like pay a high fee and maybe pay something if it's late. So then they went to this model instead where they came up with like a monthly subscription, and you could have multiple movies out at a time, and there was no late fees. It was just you could have 3 movies out at a time, but you had to return one of them in order to get a new one. And the main thing that they brought to the industry was this idea of creating a queue, right? So you would go on to Netflix and you would pick the movies that you wanted to rent. Like you'd have a list of like, some people would have 50 or hundreds of movies there, right? And they would always send you a movie from your list, right? And if they didn't have one, they would just send you the next one and they'd come back and get the other one another time. So there was an ongoing thing. And as soon as you sent one back, then another one would ship out, and there was no late fees, and it was a subscription fee per month. And there was no limit on how many movies you could watch per month. You could just not have more than 3 out at a time. So it created this sort of different paradigm. But the thing that was most proprietary and most like the thing that people liked about the service was this idea that like you were creating your own history of things that you had already rented. So they didn't recommend things to you you'd already seen, right? And then it was constantly working to update what it thought you would like for recommendations. And you could keep this queue, and like it would be checked off as you watched them, right? And so I think this was like a really early example, and maybe it was just normal at first and not in any way nefarious, but a person basically telling you all about themselves, what they like, what they don't like, right? And keeping sort of a list online of the things that they have seen or know about and the things that they don't, right? And that's what separated them from like Blockbuster or Hollywood Video or anything like that. Like that became the thing that most people really liked, and what ended up bringing them back to the service if they left and tried something else for a while or whatnot.
Right, like it's tailored to each person individually.
Individually tailored, and the profile remains. Even if you quit the service, if you came back 6 months later and signed back up, they hadn't deleted you from the system. Right. So this is kind of like Facebook, like, right. Like if somebody goes to the great pains of getting off of Facebook, if they ever come back, everything's just restored. Right. So they're holding the dossier, even if you're not continually adding it to it yourself. Right.
Right.
That's interesting. But one of the things that I found most interesting about these early days of Netflix, and I think this is where I think this is something that's not talked about often. And I think this is like where maybe some interesting areas of exploration lie before we even get into the streaming and the on-demand shit. In these early days, when they were having a distribution problem, when they were trying to not only get movies to people faster, they didn't seem to have so much trouble getting them to people. They had trouble sometimes getting them back quickly. They arranged a deal with the US Postal Service to sort of separate the Netflix stuff out, because it was easy to identify. Like they had a very particular like red envelope that it came in. So separate things out, and instead of running it through like the regular route, they would just have a truck that just drove it straight direct, all the Netflix things straight to the distribution center. And at first it was just in Northern California, but then this branched out everywhere. So there you have Netflix with a private agreement with the government service to do a separate service for them. So you and I have to wait, right, the normal amount of time for our mail, right?
Mhm.
But the Netflix gets prioritized based on having been separated out and driven straight there instead of stopping everywhere on the route,
They get
right?
a whole vehicle devoted to Netflix DVDs.
Like basically correct. So like when, like,
Wow.
let's just say like it started out in Sunnyvale and then the Sacramento was like the next place and then it went everywhere. Whenever things would come in, rather than just putting them in the regular mail truck to get dropped off individually at Netflix, right? They would pull everything out and keep it in a separate bag and then send a truck just over to deliver them all at one time, right? And
Okay.
so everything, so they would, get a full shipment sort of back every day. Now, what's interesting is in this document where it gives all these details about how this worked, there was no indication of what, like if there was a financial deal worked out, like there was no indication of did Netflix pay for this service, or did they make like a tax deductible donation to something or
Right.
whatever. I'm going to go out pretty not very far on a limb with you and say they actually, the US, the government was probably excited to do this because this would enable them to start a database of who was watching what.
Right.
And how often, how many movies were people watching? How many, like what is this person's interest, right? Like this, all this kind of stuff. My guess is going to be Netflix paid little or nothing, right? For this expanded degree of service, because it was actually a two-way street. What do you think?
It's a symbiotic relationship, right?
Yeah. Right.
Oh.
So I thought that was fascinating. Okay, so this is I'm kind of going on like a gloss over of some of this. Remember, Netflix came in at the time, like Netflix was never involved in VHS cassette. They came in when DVDs had started to become popular, and their business was based on basically shipping and returning of DVDs, a kind of thing, right? And then, at a certain point, like they started to really take off, right? When they began to take off was when they began to do deals with the actual movie studios themselves, so that they didn't have to buy so many copies of new releases. First of all, they could be given them by the studios, and then the studios would earn a percentage, as opposed to having to buy this really expensive inventory of videos. So that happened, but that also started their relationship directly with the movie studios. And what they began to do was to help the movie studios to get wider distribution for their less popular films, so that the movie studios could make more money off of films that hadn't been huge blockbusters at the box office. Right? So there we start to have another sort of back and forth relationship. And my guess, and this happened when they brought in a particular, someone new to the business. But this was probably the first step towards what we see now, which is that, obviously not Netflix is largely creating their own content, right? Kind of thing. But this relationship with the movie studios started pretty early on, mostly as a way for Netflix not to have to fork out so much money to begin with, and to start to be able to they also then began to do deals with people whose movies would never go to the movie theater, right? They would just be released straight to DVD through a partnership with the movie studio where it was shot, and then Netflix. Netflix would be the only one to distribute those movies, other than people who them buying it on the website of the actual movie or whatever itself, right?
Right.
So that was interesting. So pretty early on, they started doing this strategic partnering with government and with movie studios, right? Like they started to become the bridge between the two as well, right? Like it's kind of interesting. So let me know, if you have any thoughts as I'm sort of going through this and you want to pop in and say anything.
Yeah, I would like to interject and just at least talk a little bit about the big movie theaters, the box office, and is that still around, or is that really literally dying and it's going the way of the newspaper, or are they somehow reviving like the whole movie experience? Because I had the feeling that was going to be sort of phased out at some point.
So now, yes, but back in what we're talking about here is like the early, between like 2000 and 2005,
Yeah,
right?
it was going strong then.
It
Right,
was
right.
going strong, and it was also like a lot more people had start to become aware of and fans of independent movies, but maybe they didn't live in a big city that had like good independent or art house movie theaters,
Hmm.
right? And so Netflix became a way for them to be able to see movies that otherwise they wouldn't be able to see. And I think that the movie studios themselves also understood probably that maybe not right away, but certainly at some point in the future, the movie theater experience was either going to change or going to go away or to change significantly. So I
Right.
think that having these kinds of straight to consumer distribution deals, as opposed to distributing movies to theaters where people will gather and pay for one viewing, that kind of thing, right? Like, I think this was a natural evolution. And at Netflix, you don't think of it, you generally think of it like, okay, Netflix started its own thing, and it's hard for them to get movies to distribute. It's expensive to have enough to distribute the way that you want to, and to do all of that stuff. And so getting a deal with the movie studios, you think that would help Netflix. But, I think in the long run, ultimately, it ended up being, as beneficial or more beneficial for movie studios than it's been for net. I think it's a good sort of back scratching kind of thing for a long time, because yeah, exactly what you're saying, right? Like,
Yeah,
the movie theater experience is changing for sure, right?
it's
But
it's it's interesting, even if you just take a moment to consider what the movie theaters are doing exactly, because they have like a specific product that they're basically like showcasing and presenting in a very glitzy fashion, where you can watch that movie from home, you can watch it on your TV, you can watch it on the computer. Now, maybe not, maybe you couldn't do that as readily before, but just the fact that back in those days there was so much like extra work and preparation, and they have to hire all the people selling the popcorn, they have to hire the people taking the tickets. It's a whole big thing for what is now you can see is simply a product that just needs a screen. Like, it doesn't need anything else besides that. It's interesting to me that, and I would like to also see if we can think of any other venue that much work and preparation is put into it. I can only really, well, I can think of like theater, right? Theater is a sort of way that you present, where there's a whole bunch of other stuff going
in
into
sports, like going to like a
it.
game or a sports or competition or whatever, right?
Right. But I feel
But it's
like what
different.
we're
But it's different because in the theater and in sports, the people are actually there. Whereas in
right.
the movies, it's just their image on film.
It's a second hand experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So I think it's interesting how like movies have moved from this experiential thing where like you go and you have, right, there's the smell of the popcorn, right, there's the sticky on the floor from everyone spilling their sodas, you're sitting there,
Mhm.
someone's behind you talking, their phone is ringing, all this kind of stuff, but there's this really human element to it, to just like viewing something privately, like at home, right? And doing it at your convenience. You don't have to be there at a certain time, right? Before I used to be like, oh, are we going to get to the movie theater on time? How many showings are there tonight? Are the tickets going to sell out? And all
Right, right.
there was this like air of like, you have to do it at this time. There's exclusivity about it, and it's a full experience. You would meet people there. If you're me, you would fall asleep in the theater. Now I fall asleep on the couch, right? But it was completely, and it created this sort of industry, but it also was watching it together as a group, right? Like, it's kind of like, I think anything that you do together as a group is ripe for programming in a different kind of way than consuming something by yourself, right?
Mm.
Because there's the combined energy of something. And when you have like a few hundred people all sitting in straight lines facing forward watching something, I mean, did you ever see the way people used to attend Hitler's speeches?
No.
Right? Or like in China, right? You see like rows of thousands and thousands and thousands of people in straight lines staring straight ahead. right? Like that group organization and singular focus is particularly good for collect programming the collective mind.
Yeah, right.
Like you never have, like, remember when you were in elementary school, like if a new movie came out, particularly if it was something like action and adventure or whatever, like after the first weekend it came out, everyone would be talking about E.T. or the new Batman or the new Star Wars or whatever. And now it's like, you're never really quite sure when a movie has come out, if it's new, if it's old, nobody's ever seen it all on the same weekend or whatever, right?
Well, we it's kind of funny because we still have to communicate to sort of like get on any sort of same page, but it's not just something where everyone knows everyone went to watch this movie because it's the biggest one in the box office and that's just
Right.
what we did. Now you have to say, hey, have you seen this? And it's always on Netflix, right? Maybe occasionally it's on YouTube because all the streaming platforms you can see movies now, but now they're just have to be, now it's like, hey, did the did the thought algorithm detect the same thing for you that it did for me, and now we're watching all the same, the same things. It's very interesting to see exactly how it's evolving, but it's also kind of sad at the same time because you can see that it's evolving the human element out, not necessarily because we want to make humans go extinct or something like that, but because that's like efficient. It's an efficient thing to do to remove like redundancies.
Well, that's the thing, right? The whole, like, that's the whole thing with all of this stuff. It's even something that starts out as providing an efficient or a personal service, and that could be with like only good intentions in mind, starts to turn into this other thing. And then the other question that I'm just thinking of as you're talking is like, how closely correlated is like on-demand streaming? And we're going to get to we haven't even gotten to the like on-demand portion of Netflix yet. We're still just in this delivery and service that they had started.
Mm-hmm.
Like when it used to be that like, generally a movie would come out and it'd be widely, if it was a big, well-marketed movie, like it'd come out and it'd be in every movie theater, like a lot of movie theaters, the first few weeks it was out, and then a few less and whatever, but it'd be in the movie theater if it was any good for a few months. And then it would take 6 months to a year for it to go to video. And during that period of time, there would be a few months where like it wasn't available anywhere. All the theaters had stopped showing it and it hadn't gone to video yet. Right. So it was like everybody either rushed out to see it or they had to wait. And if you really think about that, that keeps like the timeline of a civilization intact in a way that once everything starts becoming individualized and separate and anybody can stream anything at any time, this is creating divergences sort of in the timeline. Like if I see a movie today and I'm unclear about when it was made, or even I'm clear about it, but I'm experiencing it for the first time, and you see the same movie 2 years before or 2 years from now, and you're having that now experience at a different time than I did, what does that do to our experience of what's supposed to be like our shared timeline?
Yeah, that's a very good point. It's a very good point. And maybe partially that's what Facebook and these other social media companies, maybe partially that's what they're trying to do is hold together some form of continuity, some form of social overlap, so everyone's not strictly within our little bubble where we try to talk to the friend or the neighbor. Like even now we're talking to each other on the screen and we're trying to find, like, we can find what have we seen together. Like we know there's a few movies that we've talked about, but maybe that's partially the role of the social media companies, is to provide like at least an avenue for the similar consumption, so you have something to talk about. So it's not just I've watched this show and this show and this show and there's literally a million to pick from, so the chances that you watch the same three is just highly unlikely. Maybe that's providing a way to actually sort of manually almost, or even algorithmically tie in like similarities.
Well, and also think about like, so I just went through this experience where I rewatched the entire series of Twin Peaks from when it had started in the 90s. And then I had never watched before the updated series that came out in 2017. I just watched all of them a few months ago. And while I had seen most of the original series back when I was a teenager, I just thought it was a regular murder mystery. I didn't understand anything about like the occult or esotericism or Freemasonry or mind control or, any steganography or UFOs or anything like that then, right? So to me, I was just like watching a murder mystery. And I went back and watched it and I was like, holy shit, like all this stuff that we talk about now, that was all like laid out then, but I didn't have any mind to understand it. So I didn't even remember that part of it, right? Until I watched it again. And then fast forward to the part that came out in 2017. I didn't watch it then because I was busy with other stuff. I watched it now in 2021 and it feels really pertinent to right now for me, right? So like to me, it's like, okay, this is important to be watching now. I'm watching it now for a reason. But are the people who watched it in 2017, are they ahead of me? Did they feel it was pertinent to now then? Or was it not pertinent to now then? So they didn't have a context for understanding it. Right. And so like, you know, it was kind of ahead of its time, just the way for me back when I watched the original one in 1990, it was just a murder mystery. And like, you know, if somebody watched it in 2017, they weren't quite ready to grok, you know, time travel through electricity in the way that maybe they would be now based on the experience we've all had over the last year and a half and the advancing electrification of our society and the side effects that have come with that. Right. So it's very, when you view something is very determinant of like where you are in time, right? In the movie now, it used to be that they could control somewhat when and how it was seen. And now it's just like all over the place.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just strange and interesting to think about how what we call the feed, right? We call it the feed on social media, how that's curated. Because like originally it was like viewing media like in a museum or something, right? They would call the person who collected them the curator. And now that job has just been given to an algorithm. And the algorithm literally it picks out of, because if you think about it, if you know, most of us have 1,000 plus probably so-called friends on Facebook.
Right.
And the feed is picked from that group of people. Like you can't see all 1,000, you know, people's timelines. You have, it has to pick a certain segment of those. And how does it pick those is kind of like, it's fascinating to think of, because the algorithms are now sort of pruning the bush of your social experience. And your social experience is no longer physical, it's purely digital. Like if you think about, now I still hang out with people physically sometimes when I can, like I like to, but generally speaking, most social interactions are relegated to the screen and with little dopamine hits with the little red icon things, you know, oh, red things. Like why did red become the signifier for the dopamine hit anyway? I was curious about that.
So, well, I think most of them are red or blue, right? So red or blue it kind of does completely different. Somebody sent me an email about that the other day. I have to refer back to it to get exactly what they were saying. But yeah, I mean, generally, like one is associated with more masculine, one with more feminine, right? Hot, cold, all of that kind of stuff, right? Like there's a million extremes, and then the purple being in the middle, which is kind of like the fusion of all things, or it's royalty or whatever.
Yeah, royalty. I was just talking about that yesterday, literally in a video I made.
Right.
And that's cops too, right? Is red and blue flashing lights.
Do you know what CRISPR is? You know what CRISPR is, right?
The gene editing software, right?
So when you were talking about the editing of the algorithm, it made me think of, because we watched this interesting documentary on Netflix about CRISPR. And of course, it's, you know, you get a different view of CRISPR from watching something about it on Netflix than if you go find a YouTube video from somebody who's done a lot of patent digging and research and is, you know, generally anti, you know, big pharma and stuff like that. But it was interesting to see the Netflix sort of, you know, the sanitized version of CRISPR. But it did give me an education on what CRISPR actually is that I didn't understand before. And it is a biological thing that actually occurs in nature. It is not a created technology. They've piggybacked technologies on the back of it, and they've created synthetic versions of it. But it's basically a way that a bacteria is able to edit itself to deal with virus infiltration, right?
Okay.
It occurs in nature. This is how they found out about it, right? It's a process that it occurs in nature. And exactly the way they describe it is it goes in and it cuts out parts, like it snips out, like cutting, like editing, you know, like a film strip or something like that. Like
Yeah.
there's this sort of like naturally occurring editing thing, biological, it snips it out, and then it can either put the other two together or replace. Now what's happening is, so basically it would go in and snip out the part where the problem was, and then just put the other parts together. Now what they're doing as they add technologies onto it, at least if I understand it correctly, is replacing that sequence they cut out with something else, as opposed to just like seaming them back together.
That's cutting it back. Yeah, right? Just cutting and sealing.
So think about now, when you were talking about the curation of the social feed, and people are going and snipping, like deciding, okay, this person is no longer important to your reality, either because you've actually decided that or we're deciding that for you. But they're not just eliminating people, they're actually replacing it with other people. Have you ever had this like experience of like some person that you don't know, you've definitely never met in real life and probably never even talked to online, suddenly you're seeing all their posts and you're not really, it's sometimes maybe something, it's like, oh wow, how did I not know this person? It is interesting, but more often than not, it's like, why are they showing me this? Like, I don't give two shits about this at all. But they have decided at Facebook for some reason that it is vitally important for you to see everything this person posts all of a sudden. Have you had this experience?
Yeah, sometimes random people pop up without without me remembering, oh yes, I went and searched something about that person because of whatever. Or like a lot of times I see, I guess the easier way to say it is I don't know exactly how the thing is curated, because
Right.
I don't go like manually searching, and I probably should if I wanted to sort of have a hand in the curation of my feed. What you should do, or as far as I can tell, what you should do if you want to have a hand in it, is you should literally like go through your friends list every once in a while, read the names, like know who's on your list. That will spark memories, and you will sort of be able to go look at the ones that you remember and see, what's going on with them. That will update your actual like internal feed. Because if you don't ever do that, then I forget people exist. That's just what happens. Like,
what if you forget someone that exists? Do they actually cease to exist? It's a very interesting question to ask.
I don't know.
How is it that like you'll think about somebody and then the next day you run into them after you haven't seen them for like 15 years, right? All the other days you didn't run into them, but the day after you thought about them, you ran into them. So did you bring them back?
Maybe because if you don't, like if they're not in your mind and they're just disappeared to you, and you're not doing anything actively to try to bring them back into your mind, they're gone. Like, they don't exist anymore to your mind. And of course this could go to solipsism and all this nonsense, which I don't really dabble in. I used to when I was younger, but the whole idea of like, what is the reality actually, and is there a sort of like fixed reality outside of someone's perception of it? And then you can go into Akashic records and things like that. But I think that's part of the mystery, is trying to imagine what it actually means. Like, when someone is not in your mind, where are they? And you can say, oh, well, I know how to find them. I can go find them on social. I can go find their phone number. Well, you're going inside of your own mind to go find them, right? So you can never really prove that there is an independent from your own mind existence of this person. It's impossible to prove that.
Yeah. So, like, this is exactly how it works on these social media feeds, right? Like, someone will show up in your feed and you're like, I'm not interested. And so you go and it's, you kind of like, sometimes you accidentally get signed up to like follow someone or see their post. So then you undo it and then they're out. But sometimes it isn't even that. It's just for some reason they were showing it to you. But if there's somebody that you do decide to go examine their page, then all of a sudden you start seeing all their stuff again. So it's exactly like that thing of like, I thought of them and then they were brought back into the fold. And we think that like, oh, this is something the social media companies are doing. And I think that's a possibility, that as feed curation becomes stronger in the technological realm, the natural world, or the so-called natural world, or the augmented mediated world out here, it responds in kind and starts to do the same thing. Or there's an understanding that that's actually how nature works, and these technologies are sort of doing that without really letting us know that that's actually how reality works. And we're just mimicking an already biological process.
Yeah, I think all technology mimics biology. I think that's just how it goes.
Yeah, the metabiology I mean, absolutely. But at what point do they start to, like, does there start to be symbiosis? And it happens to be the other way around, that the biology and the outer natural world experience starts to reflect the technological experience in that way.
Well, yeah, I mean, I feel like that's sort of happening now to some extent.
Right.
I feel like the external world has sort of taken second fiddle position as far as which part of the reality is more important to you. I mean,
Yeah.
the phones tell you how many hours you spend on the screen, and it'll pop up at the end of the day and say your screen time is up this many, this much percent, or down this much percent. But it's still like it's a lot of hours. Whether or not anybody likes to admit it, we spend a lot of time staring into our phone screen, and probably proportionately speaking, more time staring into the phone than actually having a physical face-to-face interaction. And that, of course, begs the question: does it matter if the devices are getting more of our attention than actual human beings? Because it could be argued that you talk about the same dumb shit in person as you do online, so
right.
Is it really better or not? I don't, that you could argue that, but we're definitely spending more time now looking into the screen because it's gotten really good at sort of reflecting our own essence. That's what, like what I said on social media a little while ago, the social media things are there to parse your mind out. Like humanity's collective mind, they're there to parse it out, divided into sections, identifiable sections, searchable sections. And basically it's externalizing the memory of humanity in a way that you can manually search through it. What does it mean exactly? I don't know.
So I think it's interesting also that Netflix, they were one of the first companies to have one of these algorithms where a person was sort of curating their own, like they would provide the information and the software would respond exactly to what they got, right? Like it was, you said, I like this, 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 and this, and then they'd show you this, 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 and that, right? It seemed pretty one-to-one, the response. Like you could go down a whole list and check off, I like this, I don't like this, I like this, I don't like this. It wasn't just them assuming that you like that because you like these three things, you also like this, right? It was much more one-to-one. It was a much more sort of true to the user's desire, as opposed to like trying to guess the user's desire or try to play to it or increase their desire for something than we experience now, right? Mm-hmm. So that was actually what people really liked about it. And this is what made them really start to begin to grow and compete and challenge Blockbuster. And eventually Blockbuster also started doing online distribution in terms of like people could order things and have it delivered to their house in addition to going to the stores, right? They started coming in and doing that because they were starting to get threatened by Netflix in that way, right? Based on this preference and being able to really cater to what the customer's needs were. And then the next thing that came up was video on demand, right? And do you remember what video on demand was like in the early days?
I don't know if I even have a framework for that, because I didn't even really do Netflix when they were sending physical DVDs out. Mm-hmm. That was back when I didn't have the TV. I didn't have like the access to even watch these things. This was, let's see, I was born in '85. Probably didn't sort of have my own area till I was like 20 years old. That'd be 2005, right? I guess this could have been in the sort of arena where I had a TV, but I never really like ordered Netflix DVDs. I know what the slips look like. Like there were these little red things with the U in them, right? Like there's you could see part of the CD.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I never really did it myself. It was all the stuff I consumed was digital.
So when video on demand first started happening, it was like first of all, like the cable box, you could go there and instead of watching it at the time HBO was showing it, you could like order it whenever you wanted it, but it was still through cable. And then there started to be as well, like websites where you could go and you could either pay like 20 or 30 or $40 to download a movie, right? Or you might be able to pay $5 or $10 to like have a temporary download that you'd have like 48 hours to watch it, right? And then after that, it expired. But if you were buying the more expensive version, you could keep that file. So there was that option. And then there was also started to be these things where like you could, certain companies created a box that would go next to your cable box and you could rent things sort of through there, right?
Like a Roku.
Right, but it was earlier. This was back in like 2007, like whatever, right? So there wasn't like streaming in the way that there's streaming now, other than video on demand, and cable seems to have a monopoly on that because they already had boxes connected to people's TVs at home, right? Like there was this challenge because people didn't want to pay as much money to watch something on a little tiny computer screen, especially because TV screens were getting bigger and nicer and whatever. And there wasn't this easy way to mirror the computer onto your TV yet. We didn't have Rokus. There was these weird tabletop boxes kind of thing, or there was cable, right? Or you're watching on your computer. In some places you could download, burn it to a DVD and then watch it on your DVD player, but it was like a clunky process, right? And so Netflix started to figure out how they were going to manage this. Were they going to just move strictly to video on demand? Were they going to do kind of a combined service? And for a while it was that. It may even still be. For a while, like some movies were available streaming and others, if you wanted to watch them, you had to pay a higher rate to get things sent to you or whatever. But it was basically like Netflix considered just selling their curation system to the cable companies, and then the cable companies could like let people run. It would be the cable box, but Netflix would be providing like the algorithm, helping people choose what they were going to buy, right? So they considered doing that. Like that was one of the options. Another one of the options was to integrate, a streaming online feature with their standard offer, which is they did that for a while. And then the last thing would be to just become like a standalone kind of video thing where people would download things or maybe later streaming. And this leaves off right at that point where he's making that decision. Obviously, he went with the combined model where they began doing something streaming. I don't know if they still have a DVD delivery service for films that aren't streaming. But by doing this, one of the things that they sort of switched to, when you buy an actual DVD, like when Netflix would buy a DVD from a movie studio or have it fronted to them from the movie studio, there's no limit on how many times you can let somebody watch that, right? Like if you paid for it, you can rent it out to as many people. So you can buy a DVD for $20 and then make $2,000 renting it out a various number of times. But when you have a digital file that is going to be downloaded or streamed, there's licensing fees are different. You have to like pay a fee sort of every time. So it was kind of like a big switch, right? And this paper leaves off like with the legal case or something right at that point where they're making the decision, are we going into streaming or are we not? And obviously they went into streaming, right? And then where we are now, there, I'd say a good portion of the content on Netflix is our Netflix original series or things that other studios created and then Netflix bought them. So they never were distributed anywhere else, right? So now Netflix really is like, even though they still are not a highly profitable company, like they're really the biggest business in movies and television watching, right? It's kind of fascinating. So
yeah, right.
And you have this, remember we had Barack Obama and Susan Rice and all that on the board of Netflix, right? And so you have this government in bed with Netflix, right? Influencing the kind of movies that are being made, right? And what things are being focused on. And in my head, this partnership, because in the beginning, it didn't seem like they were in bed with too many of the usual suspects. I didn't see any Incutel in there or any DARPA kinds of weird, stuff like you see with Facebook or Napster or any of that kind of stuff. But the sort of public-private partnership with government started with this arrangement with the Postal Service. And if you think about it, I mean, this has been part of the conversation over the last year and a half. The Postal Service has like some of the most amount of information on individuals in the United States of any government agency. And sometimes they try to do things through the Postal Service that they wouldn't be able to get away with doing through any other agency, right?
Yeah. The post office is definitely like it's very intimate with it knows where everybody lives, to begin with. They know where you live.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like the post office itself is like, that's like government intrusion into citizens' lives like 1.0.
Mm-hmm.
And then it just starts getting, Facebook is like the 5th or 6th iteration of that, like intrusion into the people's lives. But it's obviously been happening excuse me, for a long time, because you can now, like, people think that there are thought detection algorithms now, like currently active, where you think about a can of Pringles and it's going to pop up on your feed, in an hour or two. And whether or not that's actually happening, everybody knows, if you talk about something, your computer will hear it and it will produce it on your feed. But they haven't like publicly announced that they're sort of audio scraping like that, right?
Not they haven't come out and been like, hey guys, we have great news, right? We're trying to make your life easier by offering you a coupon for everything you talk about, right?
Right. It should, though, right? I mean, there should be some form of sort of public disclosure that this much surveillance is is happening. This much data collection, this active data collection is constantly happening.
So think about this. It used to be if you wanted to do surveillance on a person, you either went through their garbage or you went through their mail, right? Mm-hmm. And generally, in times past, government agencies could go through your garbage if it was outside your home without a warrant. But if they wanted to go through your mail, they had to get a warrant, right? They weren't supposed to intercept mail without a warrant. But this deal with Netflix made it so that they could at least understand what everybody was consuming. And then think about what's happened now. How many times have we gotten a series on Netflix the same week that thing is actually happening? Think about the Bill Gates and Barack Obama documentary about pandemic that landed like the same week that we went on lockdown, right? Or think about, the last show you and I talked about was Katla, and that came out right as La Palma started to continuously erupt.
Right. Yeah, I feel like it's not, I don't know exactly how to say it, but I feel like Netflix in what it produces for you as far as available for consumption, I don't feel like that's, necessarily personally derived. I feel like a group of people will be presented with a sort of movie, because this phenomenon happened with quite a few different movies that we've all been talking about. Yeah. Katla being one of them, Travelers being another one. Squid Game, like obviously it showed every single person in the so-called truth community that movie. So
is Squid Game good? I haven't watched Squid Game yet.
We just started watching it. It's pretty decent, like in terms of something that's revealing some of what this reality may be operating underneath. It's pretty decent.
So yeah, I haven't seen that yet, but I may take a look at that. So I just think the sort of reach, I mean, we don't, Netflix still does have a similar curation sort of thing. Like it asks you to rate the movies to see if you like it. It does recommend things based on the other things that you've watched. However, right, like we've all had the experience of like, everybody else can be talking about some big new thing on Netflix and that isn't coming up in my feed unless I go look for it. Right. Or something like I find out that there's a movie or a TV show that I would definitely be interested in that's been out for a long time. It's always been on Netflix, but it never showed up in my feed. Right. So like, that's bizarre. Right. And so, one wonders kind of, what is going on with some of that kind of stuff. But I think what's fascinating here, the big takeaway is just like why was it not a paper about Blockbuster? Why was it not a paper about AMC movie theaters? Why did the person leave a paper about Netflix by the printer, right? When we're in midst of this series and we had just put out the last episode, and then this whole sort of private deal with the post office, and that there's no I find that, Amazon is in that now too, right? They have their own delivery trucks, but they also do deliver some things sort of through the mail, right? But nobody would have ever suspected that Netflix had privately, commissioned, portions of USPS fleet to help them with their accurate delivery, right? So anyway, I thought that was kind of interesting. Any sort of other thoughts on the Netflix as an organization in light of what we've been talking about before we move on to the manifest section?
I would say in terms of Netflix being a social media engine, which it is at its core, still just another social media engine. I would say that as far as how it feels to me, it does not feel quite as intrusive as a Facebook. I feel like if it started off trying to distinguish itself from other, film companies or streaming companies by custom tailoring and trying to basically make the end user as happy as possible. I feel like they have still carried that goal forward through into now, because I don't feel as violated, I guess, by Netflix as I do by, say, Facebook and their fact checkers, or YouTube and their blatant suppression and blocking of lots of different types of ideas. So in that aspect, I guess I would say I'm happy that Netflix has sort of tailored their algorithms the way that they have.
Yeah, it's definitely a different kind of, I was just looking, he had some interesting statement he had here where he was talking about, if he was conflicted about moving from, being a DVD business into being an online streaming. And he was like, I didn't say I was here to be, we called it Netflix, not DVDs on demand for a reason, right? Because we knew that this internet age was coming, and our idea was always to provide the best viewer experience possible, whatever that is, right? So anywho, all right, so let's wrap up here and let's move over into the patron segment. We're gonna talk about the TV series Manifest, and I also want to chat a little bit about this two other series that I've been watching on Netflix. They're kind of different than the ones we normally talk about. I just want to say a few things about them. Before we move on over to the patron segment, Gary, tell people what you got going on, where they can find you, all that jazz.
You can email me at gapawa1985@gmail.com. I'm on Facebook, just Gary Warmerdam. YouTube is also Gary Warmerdam. That's pretty much it for now. I'm not quite as active. I'm kind of taking a little bit of a backseat in terms of internet online presentations. I'm moving a little bit more into being active creatively speaking, in my own local arena, my own house, physically making things, concentrating on that side. Basically, I'm trying to pull some of my essence out of the internet, where it's just you're splayed out over the digital biosphere, and I want to balance it out just a little bit. But that's where you can find me.
Are you still doing your Golden Spiral series and your Patreon stuff, or where are you at with that stuff?
I stopped the Golden Spiral, and not because it kind of came to its own sort of end, because it was living off of a certain amount of energy from when I first started it, and I could see it was coming to a point where I was going to have to start really hunting people down and putting a lot of time and effort into finding people.
Yeah.
And maybe if I didn't have a full-time job, then that would be something I would have enough time and energy to invest in, but it really is not. So You know, I got a third of the way there. 17, I believe, is a third of 52. So
All right. So you're just doing occasional live streams and stuff with some
yeah,
of your favorite people to chat with and whatnot. And you're still on Patreon?
still on Patreon. You can still support in a general fashion. Patreon.com/snail show. And of course, you know, YouTube, the snail show will still go on. And just like what I'm doing with you now, this is a part of a sort of regular thing that we do on your side, but
Yeah.
I'm still open to the occasional show and whatnot. But as far as me like actively trying to do a thing, I'm taking a little bit of a stepping back from that.
All righty. Okay, guys, you can catch the second half at patreon.com/offplanetmedia or emilymoyer.locals.com. And I think it will probably also be available on Gary's Patreon, which is patreon.com/snail show, right?
Yep.
Okay, cool. Guys, we'll see you on the other side. Right back.